The book that I've got with me today is called The Untold Story of India's First Newspaper. That should give you a clue. More than a clue, I suppose. It's written by Otis, and the book primarily revolves around the life of an Irishman called James Augustus Hicky, who really founded the first newspaper in India. And the newspaper was called Bengal Gazette. So, how did James Hicky did this? The book precisely tells us the story. The story begins with the life of James Hicky, who was, although a journalist and a writer, but he had worked on a number of jobs. When he was young, he moved to London to apprentice with a Scottish printer. Then he secured a clerkship with an English lawyer, and at some point he quit his career in law and made a brief attempt at practicing as a surgeon in London. And he left that too and joined Navy, and part of that he came to India from England. And in India he was living in Calcutta. So the book starts with the story of a really filthy place where most Englishmen won't care to live. Any European would stay away from that kind of place, and the author gives us the descriptive view of the locality and the surroundings of the Calcutta jail and around that area where James Hicky was staying at that time. So let me narrate what was going on there. William Hicky had only been in Calcutta for a few days when a man in the common jail sent him a letter begging for help. This was November 1777. He was curious to meet this Irishman whose last name was almost the same as his. Everything William saw shocked him. Everything, even people, were for sale. Bathhouses offered their services, and taverns sold cheap arrack. On one side of the square, elite society held lavish balls and banquets in the Harmonic House, Calcutta's most fashionable club. On the other, prisoners fought for daily survival in Calcutta's common jail. Nooses were on display outside for those sentenced to death. Pillories were prepared for perjurers, nails ready to be hammered into their ears to mark them as criminals for life. Thieves were whipped up and down the square to the beat of a tom-tom drum, while prisoners were brought to and from jail in a device that looked like a giant bird cage with perforated air holes suspended 14 feet in the air on wheels so the whole city could see their shame. William entered the jail through a deep gateway leading into a small courtyard. The smell of rot, feces, and decay assaulted him. He peered into the rooms surrounding him, where small cells held hundreds of prisoners. There were almost no windows, and the few openings were too small to let much air pass through. The stench is dreadful, he later recalled, more offensive than any ever experienced in this country. The jail was horrific on a level he had never seen before. It brought him back to when he visited the King's Bench prison in London as a young lawyer. While it had been overcrowded, Calcutta's was so much worse. They will not bear a comparison, he said of the two jails. William moved deeper into the jail. He could feel the despair in the humid heat. Hindus, Muslims, Europeans, men and women all lived in the same place. Felons, debtors, and fettered prisoners intermingled, their iron chains clinking as they moved. Many were deathly ill. There was no hospital or infirmary, so the sick had to fend for themselves. Prisoners also had to pay for their own food, water, and lodging, trapping them in an impossible cycle of debt. This situation was made worse by the British East India Company's refusals to forgive their debts. William headed to the prison yard at the back, where he saw many living in the open and where some Europeans had erected small bamboo huts. Open drains of excrement and urine ran into the water tank nearby, the jail's only water source, where the prisoners drank, washed, and bathed. If prisoners were fortunate, the jailer allowed their family, servants, or friends to bring them food or water. But not all were so fortunate. An old woman approached and begged him for money. She said she only wanted to buy water, otherwise she would have none. Then William spotted the bamboo shed he had been looking for and greeted the man inside. The man, more than anything in this jail, would shock him most of all. Inside was James Augustus Hicky, the man who would found the first newspaper in India. James told him his tale. So at this point, now James Hicky tells him his story, how he reached Calcutta and ended up in this jail. And the two become friends. And the other Hicky, William Hicky, he continues to visit him repeatedly after this first visit. And eventually William did help him, although initially there were a lot of doubts about James Hicky, especially his behavior in the court. And William himself had seen that no lawyer was ready to represent him. In William's own words, he says, "I learned that he was extremely violent, yielding so much to sudden gusts of passion and so grossly abusing whoever acted for him that at length not a professional man could be found." And yet William was drawn to Hicky, and he kind of respected him for enduring Calcutta's common jail. And as these two newly formed friends, they got closer, William eventually decided to fight his case. And he did. And the moment he represented Hicky in the court, the same thing happened as it was feared. He had an outburst, and this really infuriated William. So he writes, "The poor devil burst into a violent flood of tears, threw himself upon his knees, entreating the judges to plead for him with me, and that if I would forgive him and continue to manage his business, he would leave the court and in future be guided solely by me." In the subsequent trials, similar things happened, but still, thanks to William, James Hicky won this trial. And so, with this newly found freedom, James Augustus Hicky would start venturing into new businesses. He would do new jobs now, and then eventually in 1780, after the 90 years of the founding of the city of Calcutta, he would start the city's and in fact the country's first newspaper. But of course, there is much more to the story, and this was just a brief outline for you. And I hope you will read the book and you will enjoy it even more.